Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking about corn planting, and what I'm thinking about is corn rootworm. That's a big issue, and if you don't stop it at planting time, it's going to haunt you all year long, so we'll show you how to get them under control.
Well, I don't care if you're planting corn or soybeans or wheat or any crop. If you don't do the right things in terms of fertility, you're going to have a lodging problem through the year. So we want to talk today about exactly what you can do without even ever calling the seed dealer. Don't blame the seed corn or the soybean variety or the wheat variety. It's a fertility issue. We're going to discuss it.
Well, someone complained our winter was a little too cold, but you know what? Every year, something really thrives. Our Weed of the Week is one of those plants that is thriving this year again. We'll show you how to stop it on your farm. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Ag PhD radio show just the other day, Darren and I took a question from a farmer who said, hey, what's the right planting depth for corn? And you know what? It doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether you're in Florida like this caller was, or if you're in South Dakota like we are, or New York or California. If the conditions are wet or dry, hot or cold, there is a certain planting depth we want you to have for corn. So we thought we'd talk about that during our Farm Basics time today.
Well, everybody's always trying to outsmart nature. And yeah, you're right. When conditions vary, people say, well, this year we need to plant a little deeper, or this year we need to plant a little more shallow. And you know what? There is a little window there where you could move around just a little bit. For example, in corn, the planting depth window is 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches deep. Now you may say, well, I want to plant a little deeper this year. Instead of 2, I'm going to go 2 1/4, or instead of 2, I'm going to go 1 3/4 and be a little more shallow. That's fine because you're still in the safe window. But there is a safe window you can't vary from. The biggest thing is you don't want to be more shallow than 1.5 inches. Corn always needs to be planted at least 1.5 inches deep.
And the reason why is because the seed stays exactly where you put it on all grass crops, corn being a grass crop. So that seed is going to stay exactly in that spot. And the problem is when you plant that seed too shallow, let's say it's at 1 inch planting depth, you may have nodal roots, the main root system of the plant, above ground.
Well, you certainly don't want to see roots above ground. That puts your plant in grave peril, and weather problems can severely limit your corn yields. The reason why corn has to be 1.5 inches deep is because above that seed, first of all, there's going to be a mesocotyl that has to be at least 3/4 of an inch long. Then above that mesocotyl, that's where the nodal roots start forming, and there are going to be 5 rings of nodal roots, and that's the main root system of your plant for gathering nutrients and gathering water. Well, those 5 rings of nodal roots need at least 3/4 of an inch so they don't have to pop above ground. So you get 3/4 of an inch for the mesocotyl, 3/4 of an inch for those nodal roots. That's 1.5 inches. That is the most shallow you could possibly plant corn without running into trouble.
Now, if let's say you plant the corn a little deeper, let's say you plant it at 2.5 inches deep, that's fine if you want to do that. It's just you're going to find a longer mesocotyl. The nodal roots are still going to be within 3/4 of an inch of the soil surface. So that's not really going to change. It's just that mesocotyl length that will change.
Now, on the deep side, we don't suggest planting corn any deeper than 2.5 inches. And the reason why, you certainly could plant corn at 3 or 4 inches deep. And if soil conditions were absolutely perfect, you may turn out okay. But chances are when you're planting that deep, you are just so subject to having some kind of surface crusting issue or a compaction issue or whatever that when the corn seed is trying to push that sprout out of the ground, it's just not going to make it. It's not going to have enough energy. The seed has enough energy just to get the plant barely started. Once that corn is out of the ground, you're going to have the radical and seminal roots starting to feed that corn plant. The seed just doesn't have that much power. So we need to not plant deeper than 2.5. Otherwise, you may see some issues with emergence and you may have to replant.
So once again, what we're looking for here is 1.5 to 2.5 inch planting depth. On our farm, we're typically shooting for 2-inch planting depth. And most of the yield studies that I've looked at over the years would show you that 2, maybe 2 1/4, 2.5, somewhere in that inch depth range. That's where your ideal yield or your maximum yield will be. But like we say, if you want to, you can go a minimum planting depth of 1.5 inches deep.
Well, unfortunately, our root system of the Weed of the Week goes much deeper than 1.5 inches or 2.5. It can severely hurt your yields. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
At Case IH, our equipment doesn't just meet the standards, it set them. With industry-leading SCR engine technology, Case IH gives you more power while still meeting tough emission standards. In fact, the Steiger 620 is the highest horsepower tractor to ever come off the assembly line. And all Case IH equipment is agronomically designed to help you maximize your yield potential and your profits. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready? Learn more at caseih.com/efficientpower.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave P. Most of your applied P gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more P available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing P availability can lead to increased P uptake in the plant. That's more P, and more P. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your P with Avail.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
One of the biggest problems for corn farmers for decades now has been corn rootworms. And what you're going to find with corn rootworms is there's the larvae, that worm stage early in the season, and then you have adult corn rootworm beetles later in the season. That's the adult stage.
We're mainly concerned with that larvae stage. That's the big thing that we have to work on right now. Now, beetles, you're going to need a foliar spray. You can spray them when you see them.
If you can kill the bug, the worms right now, then we're not going to have any adults later on.
Well, that's true. You're not going to have very many coming from your field, but they can move from field to field.
Yep.
So right now what you can control is what's in your field. And you can control these larvae that are out there. So basically last year's adult beetles laid eggs in your field. Now, it may even have been 2 years ago that the adults laid eggs in your field. There may be something called extended diapause where they don't hatch the first year, they'll hatch 2 years later. Either way, you have eggs in the ground in your cornfield. They're going to hatch as soon as corn roots start growing. It's going to trigger those eggs to hatch. The larvae are going to crawl towards your corn roots and they're going to feed on them. The only way you can treat for them is to either use a traded corn product, like a Smart Stacks corn, for example, or using some sort of insecticide at planting time.
So let's talk first about that BT trait. There are many different BT traits out there that will control rootworms, or at least we think they're going to control rootworms. The problem is, over the last few years, we've seen some of these rootworms becoming resistant to certain BT traits. Now, to this point, we haven't found any rootworms that are resistant to multiple traits. In other words, they aren't resistant to the Herculex and the Yield Guard trait, but some of them have been found to be resistant to Herculex, some resistant to Yield Guard, some resistant to other BTs that are out there. So what we encourage you to do if you're having that resistance problem is simply plant a two-traded corn.
Well, there are several different two-traded corns now on the market with Smart Stacks, with Duracade. There's a number of things that are being developed too that are going to help with this, where we're getting more combinations just to try to avoid resistance issues out in your field, because you plant that single trait rootworm product, you just don't know if there are going to be some rootworms in your field that are resistant or not. Obviously, if you've seen resistance before, you know it's a problem. But for many farmers, they they say, no, I don't know if I have a resistance issue or not, the safest bet is to plant that stacked product. Now, the other thing that you can do, in addition to planting a stacked traded hybrid, is you can use a corn rootworm insecticide. And insecticide use has grown dramatically in our country over the past few years.
Here's the thing though too, a lot of farmers are saying, well, if I'm worried about this resistance, and like in our area where we farm, we have to use insecticide because we are having resistance issues with Bt rootworm traits. So if a farmer says, well, I just don't think I'm going to use that traded product at all, I don't want to spend the extra money to go with a Smart Stax or Duracate, I think I'll just use an insecticide, you can certainly do that. But let's just think back, why did farmers want to go with the traits? The reason why is because we could get 99.9% control, or even I'll go so far as to say 100% control with the best insecticides out there. I mean, we're talking Force, Aztec, those types of products, 90% control, maybe 95 at best. Okay, that's it. And those are the best ones. So yeah, it's no big deal if you got 10 rootworms out in your field, but what if you have 1,000,000 rootworms out in your field? You don't want to have those kind of issues, so that's why we encourage you, consider still using a trait, just switch over to a double stack trait if you've got resistance issues in your area, and then in addition to that, to help protect the trait, use an insecticide.
It's kind of like weed control when you look at bug control. We're putting something out pre-emerge, we're putting it out very early, right at planting time, any of these insecticides that we're using, and we're trying to control a bug that's really not going to be a problem for a few more weeks, or maybe even a month or more, depending on how early you're planting and when the temperatures are going to warm up and the rootworms are going to start developing in your soils. So it's kind of like controlling late season pigweeds. We can do a great job with pre-emerge herbicides, but you know, there's still going to be a few escapes that pop up later.
Yeah,
That's
but
why
I don't worry about that at all, because with late season pigweed, we're talking 3 months down the road. With rootworms, you're talking a month, maybe at the very most 6 weeks. And let's face it, the only reason why the rootworms aren't hatching earlier is because we don't have enough heat. Well, if we don't have enough heat, then how is my insecticide going to break down? So I don't worry about that one bit, not one bit at all.
I'm just explaining why these insecticides aren't perfect. I think if we were putting them out the
reason
day
why
that
they're
the bugs are going to be there, it would probably be a little different story.
See, I disagree. I say the reason why these products aren't perfect is they just don't have the efficacy. They don't have the proper placement. We're not maybe using enough of that out there.
Well, okay, let's talk about that placement now. When we're thinking about putting insecticides out, there are some, like Fortress, for example, that have to be right in the furrow. There are others like Force or Aztec that you could put either in a band on top of the ground. You could do a T-band where there's a band on top of the ground and some in furrow, or you could drop them all in furrow if you want. There's really 3 different ways you could do this. And when we're talking about that, let's just say that you put all your insecticide in furrow, as many guys like to do. Where's your root system going to be? Well, it's going to grow out from that furrow. And with these insecticides,
they're going to be above the seed.
Yeah, they're going to protect a certain zone right around that seed, but your nodal roots are going to grow above that, and then they're going to stretch out beyond that. And that is a big reason why we aren't getting 100% control with them, whereas the trait, that Bt protein, is going to be all throughout that root system, and we're going to do a nice job controlling bugs, hopefully.
Well, when I come back to that efficacy thing, I guess what I'm talking about is the idea for the rootworm is it's going to take a bite out of the root. So if it's a Bt, then it has to ingest that protein. Whereas it doesn't have to go bite into the insecticide, it has to come in contact with the insecticide, and we only have a few little granules out there. There's no guarantee that it's going to hit that.
For me, where I'm planting some corn on corn, in a contiguous corn situation, you need both for sure. I am planting a Smart Stax corn, so I've got 2 traits, 2 Bt rootworm traits in the hybrid, and also I'm using a full rate of insecticide out there because I'm concerned about resistance possibly being an issue for me, and I want to make sure I don't have any kind of bug issues at all because that just devastates my root system, which ultimately devastates my yields.
Here's the other thing that I want you to consider. There is no rescue for rootworms. I get calls every summer, guys say, oh, I didn't control my rootworms early, now I need to rescue it. Well, good luck. There's just nothing that works very well. You can try a high rate of liquid Lorsban, hope for lots of rain, and maybe at best get 50% control. I mean, there's just nothing that we can do later on. That's why you've got to be thinking about this right now when you put that corn in the ground.
Well, it's going to take a pretty good shot to get rootworms under control, and it's also going to take a pretty good shot to get our weed of the week under control. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with Yield Track. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. Yield Track will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch Yield Tracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with Yield Track from Titan Machinery.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agriculture Liquid Fertilizers.
For lower cost, higher production, see your Mandaco Agri-Dealer. Ask about the best production-built land roller on the market. Mandaco, simple design for easy transport to easy use. 12 to 85-foot widths, heavy-duty 4x8 3/8-inch tube frame, and now available with a steerable wing wheel. Mandaco land rollers, improved soil-to-seed contact, faster, more uniform germination, less moisture loss, eliminate downtime due to rocks. See your Mandaco Agri-Dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello-designed chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's ahead above the rest.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
In agriculture, there's just something that drives me nuts, Darren, and it's when a farmer has his crop go down, whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever, and the first call is to the seed dealer. And I'm going, why are you calling the seed dealer? Yes, certain varieties stand a little bit better than others, but there's not a real big difference from one variety to the other. Where there is a big difference is from field to field when we compare fertility levels. If you have the right fertility, I don't care what variety you plant, it's going to stand just fine.
You know, if there's a big time weather thing and there's 120 mile an hour winds and everybody's fields go flat, okay, fine, that's a nature thing, not much we can do about that. But most times you see fields that are standing just perfect or close to it, and then you see fields that are going flat right across the road. And that's exactly right.
All right,
get the soil sampling done and find out what's going on with fertility. Then look at how much fertility that crop needs. Because when we look at a corn crop, for example, let's say you're trying to raise 200 bushel corn. You can look at how much the grain removes from the soil and fertilize that way. But if you do, you're missing out on how much fertility that stalk needs to pull out of the ground too. And you may say, I'm not removing my stalks, I'm leaving them out in my field, and I've been raising this crop here for years, I should be fine. That's not the case. If your stalks aren't like tree trunks, chances are you could use a little more fertility out there.
Okay, tell them your story about Francis Childs, the first time you went to see him and corn that was lodging all across Iowa.
Okay, so in 2003, I went out to see Francis Childs' farm. He was on the east side of Iowa, for those of you who aren't familiar with where that was at. So that year I was driving all across the state of Iowa, and in late August that year, they had some big winds, and there were a lot of cornfields that were falling all over. Not every one, but we saw quite a few cornfields that were falling over driving across the state of Iowa. When I get out to Francis's farm, I see the same hybrid that was the #1 selling hybrid across Iowa that year on his farm, and I see the field sign and everything standing just perfect. And I say, Francis, how come your corn is standing perfect with the same hybrid that all these guys across Iowa planted and it went flat? And he said, well, here's the thing. Most fertilizer dealers look at what crop removal rates are, and that's what they have you fertilize towards. And like Brian said, calling the seed dealers the wrong thing.
That's just on the grain side. Don't forget about the stover side. They look at grain removal.
Then they completely forget
for
about the
stover.
stover.
It might be 200, 250 total pounds. And that's the whole thing. If you don't know how to read a soil test and your fertilizer dealer isn't recommending enough potassium, you're lost. And then that's where all these phone calls come from, where the corn goes flat and you say, well, I don't understand. What it really comes back to is you've got to have ample potassium in that soil. So here's our point. Don't even think about increasing your plant populations in corn or any crop unless you properly fertilize. And if you don't know what you need for potassium, just look at your soil test. Base saturation percentage for K should be a minimum of 4%, and really I'd like it a little higher than that. I'd like it 5 or 6% at least, but 4% minimum. If you're less than 4%, there's a good chance that your corn, soybeans, wheat, any crop you plant could go down.
The other thing you'll have to watch in your fields is weed control. We'll show you how to stop our weed of the week coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Your farm tells a story, one that continues with the decisions you make. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is dandelion.
Dandelion is one of the first weeds that you'll see in your yard, in pastures, and out in fields because it gets a start in the fall.
And it's a perennial.
It'll start out as a rosette, and you'll see just kind of low growth towards the ground. Looks a little bit like a thistle plant, except without all the thorns. The other thing with dandelion, it will have milk inside it, and you'll see that deep taproot. And this is where it's storing up the energy, the nutrients that it needs. So in the spring, it's got a huge head start on anything that you're going to plant out in that area.
All right, let's talk about control because this might take a while. In soybeans, we've had a lot of people say, well, I want to use some 2,4-D. I know 2,4-D really helps. Look, we don't ever want you to put 2,4-D on in front of planting soybeans. Now, if you want to use it the fall before, that's fine. But in the spring before, I wouldn't do it. You can look at the label and it'll say 7 days ahead, 14, 21 days, depending on the use rate. But it's just too risky in our opinion. We've seen too many people have problems with 2,4-D in the past, so we would encourage you to take another path. Our best recommendation for you, first of all, Roundup does work pretty well. If the weather is pretty warm, use the full labeled rate, and that might be 2 or 3 quarts. But use a high rate, very high rate, and you should have fairly decent control of dandelions. You can also throw in things like metribuzin, which would be like the old Sencor or Lexone, plus Authority or Valor. You do that, plus even throw in a little bit of fertilizer, now you really got something. And well, seriously,
well,
I mean, I just don't want
you. A little while. I see why.
Right, I just don't want you using 2,4-D. Another thing is if you say, well, I don't want Roundup in my burn down because I have resistant mare's tail, I just want to use Gramoxone. That's fine. You can use Gramoxone plus metribuzin plus Authority or Valor, and
right,
you're
but you're talking about top growth control, and we're talking about a deep tap-rooted plant. That's why I really like that Roundup in the mix, because with any perennial weed, we've got to go down deep into that root system, or we're not going to get it under control. The other thing that I'd say is this: you have to control dandelions in the fall. It's another one of those weeds, just like mare's tail. You have to get them under control in the fall as much as you possibly can. In the fall is when you have your best options. Ahead of corn, we can use a strong rate of dicamba, like a full quart, and we can just smoke dandelion, and we don't see it in the spring.
We're talking.
Yeah, we can smoke it, but you just have to make sure you've got an actively growing weed. So if you wait until after a hard killing frost, it gets a lot tougher to control perennial weeds. Same thing in the spring. If you're out there too early, maybe you say, hey, I've got a great day here. It's 80 degrees and it's April. I'm going to get out there and get them. That may work, but if it's been really cold leading up to that, you may not have an actively growing weed yet. So make sure your weed is able to take in the herbicide.
All right, post-emerge in soybeans, Roundup is by far the best choice. There's nothing else that's very good. In corn, here again, we don't want you using 2,4-D in front of corn. Use Banvel pre-emerge, then use Status or Banvel post-emerge, and that's the best way to take it down if you're not going to use Roundup.
Well, dandelion is a really tough weed, and it's a bigger yield robber than we give it credit for out in fields. But in lawns, it's just a nuisance brand, and it looks terrible. In our lawns, we really like to use straight 2,4-D, get out there early, hit it with a strong rate. You may even brown your lawn up just a little bit for a week or so. If you do that, you probably dialed the rate in just perfectly.
And the main thing is to spray really early in the season, even before you see the dandelions. 2,4-D has pretty good residual. You want to spray before you see the dandelions, because by the time you see dandelions, you might also have flowers and other ornamentals that you could easily kill with the 2,4-D. So spray early in the season and late in the fall. That's where you have the best success in
And make
lawns.
sure you fertilize your lawn and your pasture. That's how you avoid having late season emergence with some dandelions.
Well, that's it for our Weed of the Week Dandelion, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
Mixing dry seed treatments in the box can be a challenge. I'll share a few tips in today's Iron Talk. On our farm, we use a dry seed treatment called Quickrits on our corn and often a dry soybean inoculant on our soybean seed. We may use some graphite or talc as well. All of these products are fairly dusty and none of them stick perfectly to the seed. We fill the seed boxes about half full and then add the dry product. Cover it up with the rest of the seed first or just begin stirring the dry product into the seed at that time. As for mixing the product, we find many farmers employing bulb augers that you may use for the garden. Otherwise, it's the broom handle or some type of stick or tube. No matter what you use, take a minute to mix the product into your seed as well as you can. One thing we've learned is that the manufacturer of Quickrits puts slightly more active ingredient in the dry product to account for any powder that ends up at the bottom of the box or blown out with the planter's air system. Do your best to handle these fine powders by adding them to the seed before the boxes are completely full and then mixing them as thoroughly as you can to get the maximum effectiveness. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
Whether you're feeding cattle, milking cows, or baling hay, the work on your farm is never done. Which is why you need equipment that works as hard as you do. Get the efficiency and versatility you need with Case IH. From farm-all compact and utility tractors to balers and mowers, all Case IH equipment is designed with one thing in mind: getting the job done. To learn more, visit caseih.com/livestock.
Looking to maximize yield? Quickrits is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quickrits continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quickrits is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quickrits today.
Your equipment's ready. The seed's in the barn. You have a strategy to overcome the challenges you'll face, and your crop protection products are pretty well locked in. But maybe you still haven't finalized your fertilizer plans. If not, visit agroliquid.com today. With products formulated for superior nutrient uptake, unsurpassed application flexibility, and proven by years of extensive research, this may be the season to take your yields to the next level using agriculture liquid fertilizers.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's show, but be sure to tune in again next time for another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more.
We also invite you to join us for our live weekday radio show. It's on at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio, that's Sirius XM, Channel 80.
I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Can you increase your field's topsoil layer by reducing tillage, planting high residue crops, utilizing cover crops, and adding manure to the soil? Topsoil can be rebuilt. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.